My friends, let me begin by saying something very direct. History has a way of humbling those who think they can bend it forever to their will. And when Donald Trump finally realizes the scale of the forces reshaping this country and the world economy, yes, he will absolutely freak out. Why? Because the very system he and others like him depended on, the capitalism that they celebrated as eternal and untouchable, is now revealing its cracks so loudly and so forcefully that no bluster, no slogan, no wall, no rally will be able to conceal it. Let us be brutally honest about where we stand. For decades, politicians, media voices, and business elites have repeated the same reassuring story that the system works, that capitalism is strong, that the American economy is a model for the world. But step outside the television studios and the boardrooms, talk to ordinary working people, and you will hear a very different truth. The cracks in the system are too big to ignore. They are not subtle. They are not hidden. They are not minor adjustments that can be fixed with a little tinkering. No, these cracks are loud. They are deep, and they are reshaping every aspect of people's lives. And here is the hook you must hold on to. The very leaders who celebrate capitalism as unshakable are the same leaders scrambling to explain why everything around us feels like it is falling apart. Think about your daily reality. Wages for the vast majority of Americans have been stagnant for over 40 years. Productivity has soared. Technology has advanced. Corporations have grown into giants, yet the average worker takes home little more, adjusted for inflation, than they did in the 1970s. Where did the wealth created by that rising productivity go? It went up into the hands of executives, shareholders, and billionaires who now control obscene amounts of wealth while millions live paycheck to paycheck. That is not a small crack. That is a structural fracture that divides this society into a tiny minority of winners and a vast majority of people struggling to get by. Look at housing. In city after city, the cost of rent has skyrocketed beyond what ordinary incomes can sustain. Young people are told to study hard, work hard, and save. But how can they save when rent devours half their paycheck? Home ownership, once portrayed as the American dream, is slipping out of reach for an entire generation. Families are forced into debt, doubling up in apartments, or leaving behind the communities they love just to find somewhere affordable. These are not isolated stories. They are widespread evidence that the system no longer provides the basic stability it once promised. That is not a cosmetic flaw. That is a crack running through the very foundation of our economy. Look at healthcare. In the wealthiest country on earth, millions go without the care they need because the system is designed to profit from sickness rather than provide for health. Medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy. Insulin prices force people to ration life, saving medicine. Families must choose between paying rent and paying for treatment. Does that sound like a system that works? Or does it sound like a system built to serve corporations, leaving ordinary people to suffer the consequences? Every medical bill that bankrupts a family is another crack in the system that no speech from Trump, Biden, or anyone else can plaster over. And then look at work itself. Stable, secure jobs with benefits are replaced by gig work, part-time contracts, and endless precarity. Or workers are told to be grateful for flexibility, but what that really means is insecurity. You don't know if you'll have enough hours. You don't know if you'll have insurance. You don't know if the company will cut costs by automating your job next month. That constant uncertainty is not an accident. It is the deliberate outcome of a system that values profit over people. And here is the hook you must grasp. When an economic system makes millions of people live in fear of the next bill, the next layoff, the next illness, it is not a success story. It is a system in crisis. Now, what makes these cracks impossible to ignore is not just their existence, But the way they interact, stagnant wages make it impossible to afford rising rent. Rising rent makes it harder to pay medical bills. Medical bills force people into debt. Debt ties people to insecure jobs. And round it goes, trapping millions in cycles of struggle, while those at the top cash in on every turn. This is not a crack you patch with slogans. This is a system that no longer delivers on its own promises. Trump and his allies will tell you that the problem is immigrants or China or some cultural conspiracy. But the real reason people feel squeezed, insecure, and anxious is not an outsider or an enemy abroad. It is the internal logic of a capitalist system in decline. That is what Trump cannot face. That is what will make him freak out. He thrives on blaming others, but the cracks are so visible now that blaming someone else simply will not cover them up. When your rent goes up by hundreds of dollars a month, it is not because of immigration policy. It is because the housing market has been turned into a casino for investors. When your wages stagnate, it is not because of foreign competition. It is because corporations decided decades ago to pocket the gains from productivity instead of sharing them with workers. When your healthcare bill crushes you, it is not because of your personal choices. It is because the system treats your pain as someone else's profit. So here is the challenge, and here is the hook that should wake you up. Every great empire, every powerful system in history told itself that it would last forever. Every king, every ruler, every elite class thought they were untouchable until the cracks grew so wide that the people saw through the illusion. We are living in that moment right now. The cracks are not temporary. They are signals of a system that cannot meet the needs of its people. And the only real question left is whether we, the people, will continue to be distracted and divided, or whether we will seize this moment to demand the transformation that history is urging us toward. Let us face something that is both uncomfortable and unavoidable. Nostalgia is not a strategy. It feels comforting. It feels powerful to look back on a so-called golden age, but the past is not coming back. Trump built his political persona on the idea that America was once great, that something was stolen from us, and that he alone could bring it back. That slogan may sound strong, it may energize rallies, but in reality, it is a dangerous illusion. You cannot undo decades of economic change with a slogan. You cannot restore a world that was already deeply unequal and unstable by pretending it was paradise. And here is the hook that should stay in your mind. Nostalgia is the opiate of politics. It numbs people, it distracts them, but it does not solve the crisis they face every day. Think about the period Trump points to, the post-war decades of the 1950s and 1960s. For a section of the American working class, wages were higher, jobs were more secure, and the U.S. seemed unmatched on the global stage. But who benefited from that? It was largely white male workers, while women were confined to the household or paid less for the same work, while African Americans and other minorities were locked out of opportunity by segregation, discrimination, and exclusion. The America Trump asks us to remember fondly was already an America divided, where many were denied rights, dignity, and access. It was not some universal golden age. It was a myth that ignores the millions who were marginalized. That is why nostalgia is so dangerous. It tells half-truths and convinces people that their suffering today can be solved by going backward. Instead of confronting the deeper issues, let us examine the economics. Trump's message implies that factories can be reopened, jobs can be restored, industries can simply be pulled back home as if nothing has changed. But that ignores 40 years of globalization, automation, and corporate restructuring. The truth is corporations left not because they had to, but because it was more profitable. They chased lower wages abroad. They embraced machines that replaced workers, and they restructured the global supply chain to maximize shareholder returns. Do you think those same corporations will suddenly abandon their profits to bring jobs back? No, they will not. And here is the hook. Trump's nostalgia promises workers something corporations will never deliver because the economic logic of capitalism rewards them for doing the exact opposite. Consider how this plays out in people's lives. Workers in the Midwest, once proud of union jobs that could support a family, have watched their communities hollow out. Trump tells them he can restore those jobs, but what he actually offers are symbolic gestures. Tariffs here, tax cuts there, while corporations continue to automate and outsource. That is not a plan, that is theater. And when the lights go down, people still face the same instability, the same insecure jobs, the same declining living standards. Nostalgia does not pay the bills. Nostalgia does not stop your rent from climbing. Nostalgia does not give you health care when you are sick. And let us not forget that the world itself has changed. The United States no longer dominates the global economy the way it did in 1950. Countries like China, India, Brazil, and others are rising, building new alliances, and demanding a seat at the table. The nostalgia that Trump sells pretends that the U.S. can simply dominate again if it just flexes hard enough. But that ignores the reality of a multipolar world where American power is challenged in every direction. You cannot reverse that clock. You cannot return to a time when the U.S. controlled half of global GDP because the rest of the world has moved forward. And here is the point Trump refuses to admit. Clinging to nostalgia leaves America unprepared for the world as it actually exists. So what is the real danger of nostalgia? It is that it takes people's legitimate anger, their real suffering, and channels it into false hope. It says, if only we go back, everything will be fine. But history does not move backward. History moves forward. And unless people demand structural change, unless they confront the deeper inequalities and contradictions of capitalism itself, the suffering will only grow. Nostalgia delays that reckoning. It makes people chase ghosts instead of confronting the future. And this is why Trump will freak out. He thrives on nostalgia. He feeds on it. He convinces his followers that he can deliver it. But the more reality crashes into that illusion, the more his promises are exposed as empty. When workers realize that their jobs are not coming back, when communities see that the factories remain closed, when people discover that tariffs cannot stop global capitalism's contradictions, the illusion crumbles. Trump cannot accept that because nostalgia is the only tool in his political arsenal. Without it, he has nothing left but bluster. The hook you must remember is this: nostalgia is a trap. It seduces, it comforts, but it enslaves people to a fantasy. Real change does not come from looking backward. It comes from organizing for the future. The working people of this country cannot afford to chase illusions any longer. The cracks are widening, the pressures are building, and the choice before us is not whether to go back to some imagined greatness, but whether to build something better than what we ever had before. One of the most profound realities of our time, and one that Donald Trump and his supporters cannot bear to face, is that the world is shifting beyond U.S. control. For nearly a century, America stood at the center of the global economy, dictating the rules, setting the terms, and exercising an authority that seemed absolute. It was assumed that Washington could shape the destiny of nations, that American corporations would dominate global markets, that the dollar would reign without challenge. But that era is coming to an end, and the more it becomes undeniable, the more Trump will be shaken, because his entire political project rests on the fantasy that the U.S. can command the world as it once did. And here is the hook you cannot forget: when reality collides with illusion, those who built their power on lies are the first to collapse. Look around the globe. The rise of China is not a rumor, it is a fact. It has grown into the second largest economy, a manufacturing powerhouse, a leader in technology, and an increasingly central player in global trade and finance, tried tariffs. He tried trade wars. He tried confrontational rhetoric, but none of it stopped China from expanding its influence. Instead, those policies hurt American farmers, raised prices for American consumers, and exposed the limits of U.S. leverage. When the world's supply chains are tied to China, when global growth depends on Chinese demand, the U.S. no longer calls all the shots. That is a historic shift, and no amount of flag-waving bravado can erase it. And it is not only China. The rise of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa signals a growing coalition of nations determined to build alternatives to U.S.-dominated institutions. They are creating new banks, trading in currencies outside the dollar, and forging agreements that bypass Washington. Each step weakens the unique privileges the United States has enjoyed for decades, like being able to print dollars and have the rest of the world accept them without question. Imagine the shock when Americans realize that the dollar's dominance is no longer guaranteed, that countries are settling trade in yuan, rupees, or rubles. For a system so dependent on global supremacy, that is not a small change. That is a tectonic shift. Now consider how Trump's message fits into this reality. He promised to make America great again by flexing muscle, by asserting dominance, by forcing others to bend. But here is the truth: he cannot admit the world is no longer willing to bow. Nations are watching U.S. debt climb to staggering levels. They are witnessing political dysfunction paralyze Washington. They are seeing economic inequality tear apart the American middle class. Why would they continue to accept U.S. leadership unquestioned when alternatives are rising? Nostalgia might blind Trump's followers, but the rest of the world sees clearly that American power is in decline. And what does decline look like at home? It looks like military interventions that fail to bring victory but drain trillions of dollars. It looks like supply chains breaking down during a pandemic, leaving Americans without basic goods. It looks like energy markets being shaped not in Washington, but in Riyadh and Moscow. These are not accidents. They are signs that the U.S. no longer has the uncontested control it once did. And here is the hook. When a nation continues to behave as if it is still the unchallenged empire, even as the world changes around it, the fall is always harder, the shock always greater. Trump will freak out because his political appeal depends on projecting strength. Yet the world is moving in directions that expose weakness. He may rally crowds with slogans, but when BRICS expands, when China leads in renewable energy, when Africa and Latin America build ties beyond Washington's reach, the slogans ring hollow. He can shout America first, but the global economy no longer responds to American commands the way it once did. That is not a failure of leadership alone. It is the natural result of history. Empires rise, they dominate, and eventually they decline. The U.S. is not exempt from that rule. The American people need to see what Trump cannot. The shifting balance of global power is not something to fear. It is something to understand and adapt to. Pretending it isn't happening, clinging to the illusion of eternal supremacy, only makes the adjustment more painful. But here is the inspiration you must draw. When the world changes, opportunities open, new alliances, new possibilities, new ways of structuring economies and societies become imaginable. The end of U.S. dominance does not have to mean chaos. It can mean freedom from a system that has burdened workers and enriched only a few. And that is precisely why Trump panics at the thought. Because if the people realize that America is not losing power because of immigrants or because of liberals, but because of the natural decline of an overextended empire, then they will stop buying into his scapegoats. They will start asking deeper questions about the system itself. They will start demanding change that goes beyond a politician's promises. That is the nightmare for Trump and the ruling class he represents. They want to distract you from the truth the world is shifting, and the U.S. cannot control it. But instead of despairing, the people can see in this shift the possibility of building something new, something fairer, something more just. That is the moment we are living in. The illusions are breaking, the cracks are widening, and the old empire is fading. Trump will freak out because his dream of restoring American dominance is colliding with the reality of global transformation. But for those who are willing to look honestly, to face the facts, and to demand a future that serves the many instead of the few, this is not a loss. This is the beginning of a new chapter. Let us speak plainly. The real enemy is not Donald Trump, nor is it any single politician. Trump is loud, theatrical, and polarizing, but he is only a symptom of something far deeper, something structural, something embedded in the very logic of the system we live under. To focus all our anger, all our frustration, all our despair on one individual is to miss the forest for the trees. Because long before Trump entered politics, the wages of American workers had been stagnating, the wealth of billionaires had been skyrocketing, and the power of corporations had been rewriting the rules of everyday life. Trump did not create that. He merely rode the wave of discontent it produced. And here is the hook you need to keep at the center of your thinking. If you cut off the branch but leave the root, the tree grows back. Remove one leader but leave the system untouched, and the same problems will resurface again and again. Consider the timeline. In the 1970s, corporations in America made a deliberate choice. They embraced globalization. They embraced automation. They crushed unions. And they redirected productivity gains upward instead of sharing them with workers. That is when the long stagnation of wages began. That is when healthcare costs soared, tuition costs exploded, and debts piled up on working families. Trump had nothing to do with those decisions. Democrats and Republicans alike presided over them, each justifying it in their own language. So when people blame one man for the economic insecurity of millions, they miss the fact that this insecurity has been building for decades under leaders of every stripe. The system was designed this way, and that is why it keeps producing the same outcomes no matter who sits in office. Trump became a lightning rod because he spoke to the pain millions were feeling. He gave them scapegoats, immigrants, China, liberals, the media. He told them someone else was stealing their future. But think carefully. While he railed against immigrants, corporations continued to offshore jobs. While he attacked China, American CEOs expanded their investments there. While he declared himself the champion of the worker, he handed out massive tax cuts to the wealthy and deregulated industries to boost corporate profits. The substance never matched the rhetoric. And here is the hook. When a politician shouts about enemies at the border, but quietly enriches the billionaires at home, you are not looking at a leader of the people. You are looking at a defender of the system dressed up in populist clothes. And so the real question is, why is the system allowed to continue producing outcomes that hurt the majority while enriching the few? The answer is because it serves those who already hold power. A capitalist system rewards profit, no matter the human cost. If profit is found in closing a factory in Ohio and opening one in Vietnam, the system rewards it. If profit is found in raising rents so high that families must leave their homes, the system rewards it. If profit is found in privatizing healthcare so that your sickness becomes their revenue, the system rewards it. This is not about Trump's personality or Biden's or anyone else's. This is about a structure that turns every crisis into an opportunity for the few at the expense of the many. Think about the financial crash of 2008. Millions of Americans lost their homes, their jobs, their savings. The banks that caused the crisis, they were bailed out. Executives kept their bonuses. ordinary people were told to tighten their belts, while Wall Street cashed in on government support. That was before Trump during the Obama years. Then came Trump, who promised to punish the elites, but instead delivered another round of deregulation and tax cuts for the very people he claimed to oppose. The system stayed the same, the players rotated, and the suffering continued. That is the pattern. That is the cycle. This is why we must understand that removing one politician is not enough. If you blame Trump alone, you will spend years chasing after personalities while the deeper problem remains untouched. The hook here is urgent. Until we confront the economic system itself, we will live in an endless loop of disappointment, frustration, and anger, always searching for villains, but never striking at the real source of the problem. And this is precisely why Trump will freak out. Because if people stop blaming immigrants or liberals or foreign countries and instead begin to see the system for what it is, his entire playbook collapses. His scapegoats no longer work. His theater no longer distracts. And once people begin to question capitalism itself, once they ask why the wealthiest country in history cannot provide health care, why it cannot guarantee housing, why it cannot ensure decent wages, then they step onto ground that terrifies every politician who serves the status quo. The truth, plain and simple, is this: Trump is not the disease. He is a symptom. The disease is a capitalist system that sacrifices the well-being of the majority for the profits of the few. You cannot cure the illness by removing the symptom. You must address the root cause. Until that reckoning comes, until people organize around the recognition that the system itself is broken, the cycle will continue. And those who profit from it will do everything in their power to distract you, to divide you, to make you think the problem is your neighbor instead of the structure that exploits you both. There is a truth that history keeps teaching us over and over, no matter how hard the powerful try to bury it. Working people hold the real power, not the billionaires, not the politicians, not the corporations. Though they sit on mountains of wealth and privilege, they are a tiny minority. The vast majority, the millions who go to work every day, who produce, who distribute, who maintain, who teach, who heal, who build. Those people are the backbone of every society. Without their labor, nothing moves, nothing functions, nothing is created. That is the reality the elites pray you will never realize, because the moment working people see their own collective strength, the illusion of the rich and powerful begins to shatter. And here is the hook you must remember: they need you far more than you need them. Think about it in the simplest terms: who grows the food you eat, who drives the trucks that deliver it, who stocks the shelves, cooks the meals, repairs the power lines, and nurses you back to health when you are sick. It is not the billionaire in the penthouse or the politician making speeches. It is ordinary workers. The economy is a giant machine, but workers are the gears that make it turn. Remove those gears, even for a day, and the machine grinds to a halt. That is why strikes terrify employers. That is why organizing terrifies politicians. Because when workers stop cooperating with a system that exploits them, the system collapses. But here is where the tragedy lies. Workers are made to feel powerless. They are told, you're just one person, you can't make a difference. Be grateful you even have a job. They are divided against each other by race, by gender, by immigration status, by political party, so that they never see the immense power they hold together. They are bombarded with images of billionaires as geniuses or job creators, as if society should bow to them in gratitude. But the reality is reversed. It is the working people who create the wealth, who make society run, who hold the true leverage. And the ruling class knows it, which is why they spend billions every year to keep workers divided, distracted, and doubting themselves. Consider moments in history when workers recognized their strength. The labor movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries forced employers to accept the 8-hour workday, weekends, safety standards, and the right to organize. None of those were gifts handed down from above. They were won because workers united and refused to accept exploitation. Look at the civil rights movement. Ordinary people, not the wealthy or the powerful, organized, marched, boycotted, and demanded justice, reshaping the legal and moral landscape of the nation. The hook is this: every great leap forward in history came not from the generosity of the elite, but from the courage of the people who dared to recognize their own power. Now, think about how this connects to today. When nurses go on strike, hospitals are forced to negotiate. When delivery drivers walk off the job, supply chains falter. When teachers organize, entire school systems must listen. These moments are not just about wages or contracts. They are reminders of a deeper truth. The people who actually do the work hold the leverage. Trump and politicians like him would prefer you forget this. They want you to think salvation comes from a strong leader at the top, that your role is to cheer and vote and hope. But the reality is that real change always begins from the bottom up, when people stop waiting for permission and start acting together. And this is where Trump will eventually lose his grip. Because if people realize that their power lies not in waiting for him, but in recognizing themselves, his entire performance crumbles. His rallies thrive on the illusion that he is the source of strength. But once the crowd understands that they themselves, the workers, the teachers, the parents, the drivers, are the true source of power, they no longer need him. They no longer need to outsource their hope to a single politician. That realization is what terrifies the elite most of all. The great paradox of our time is that workers are more connected, more educated, more capable than at any point in history, yet they are made to feel more powerless than ever. But the truth is the opposite. The moment they recognize their own collective strength, no system of exploitation can withstand them. That is why the hook you must carry with you is this: power does not rest in Washington. Power does not rest on Wall Street. It rests in your hands, in the millions of hands that together form the heartbeat of society. And when those hands act together, they can reshape the world. Everywhere you look, you can see the system breaking down. The economy feels unstable, politics is paralyzed, inequality is exploding, and trust in institutions is evaporating. For many, this produces despair. It creates the sense that collapse is inevitable and that ordinary people can do nothing but watch as the cracks widen. But history tells us something very different. Every great breakdown in the past has been the beginning of something new. Feudalism collapsed, and out of it came capitalism. Monarchies fell, and out of them came republics. Segregation crumbled, and out of it came new rights and freedoms. The truth you must hold on to is this: breakdown is not the end. It is the opening for transformation. And here is the hook you need to hear loud and clear. While those at the top panic at losing control, those at the bottom can seize the chance to build something better. The ruling class wants you to believe that crisis means you must cling to them. They say, without us, everything will fall apart. They tell you that change is dangerous, that only they can maintain stability. But look closely at who benefits from the so-called stability. Stability for them means wealth continuing to flow upward, corporations continuing to dominate, inequality continuing to grow. Their stability is your stagnation. So when the system starts to falter, it is not only a danger, it is an opportunity to ask whether this is the kind of stability worth saving. And here is the hard but liberating truth: if the old order is breaking down, then the future is not fixed. It is open, waiting for new ideas, new structures, and new possibilities. Think about moments when ordinary people saw breakdown as opportunity. During the Great Depression, capitalism looked finished. Banks failed, unemployment soared, families were thrown into destitution. The elites wanted to protect themselves and leave the rest to suffer. But people organized, they demanded social security, unemployment insurance, public works, and stronger unions. Out of collapse came reforms that reshaped American life for generations. Or look at the 1960s social unrest, assassinations, wars abroad, cities in turmoil. Out of that chaos came civil rights laws, women's liberation, environmental movements, and anti-war resistance. The system cracked, and people forced open the space to demand something new. The hook is clear. When the powerful see crisis as disaster, the people can see it as possibility. And this is precisely why Trump will freak out. He thrives on fear. He tells people that breakdown means danger, that only he can protect them, that the world without him will collapse. But what he cannot admit is that breakdown is not his enemy alone. It is the enemy of the entire ruling class, because breakdown exposes the failure of their promises. It reveals that the system cannot provide stability, cannot provide fairness, cannot deliver what people need. And once people see that, they begin to ask the forbidden question: if this system no longer works, what might come next? That question is the seed of change, and that is why every elite tries to suppress it, distract it, smother it. They want you to believe there is no alternative. But history proves there always is. The wealth of this nation, the resources of this planet, the skills and intelligence of ordinary people, these are more than enough to build a society that works for all. What prevents it is not scarcity, it is the system itself. And when that system begins to collapse under its own contradictions, the road to something new opens wider. So do not let breakdown terrify you into silence. Let it awaken you. Let it remind you that nothing lasts forever, especially not unjust systems. Every empire thought itself immortal until it wasn't. Every ruler imagined their power eternal until it crumbled. The United States is not exempt from the laws of history. Its breakdown is the signal, not of the end, but of the beginning. And the hook you must never forget is this: whether that beginning leads to liberation or to deeper oppression depends on whether ordinary people act. If they stay passive, the elites will rebuild the system in their own image as they have before. But if they organize, if they demand, if they take seriously their own power, then breakdown becomes the birth of something genuinely new. This is the moment we stand in now. Trump will panic because he cannot control it. The ruling class will scramble to protect themselves. But you, if you see clearly, if you refuse to be distracted, if you recognize that collapse is also creation, then you hold the key to the future. The cracks are widening, the old order is fading, and the possibility of change is greater than it has been in generations. Do not waste that moment. Step into it. Shape it. Claim it. Because while the powerful see breakdown as disaster, you can see it for what it truly is, the beginning of opportunity. So yes, Trump will freak out, but you should wake up, stand tall, and realize that the world is opening for change, if only we have the courage to take it.